What actually happens after we die? Death starts as a process, not a switch. The heart stops, and blood slows, and cells run out of oxygen. In minutes, the brain loses its rhythms, and neurons fall quiet, and the story of experience fades. As far as we can tell, when the brain stops working, all awareness ends. That sounds stark, but it's also clear. A person is a pattern held in living tissue, kept going by energy flowing through it. When the flow stops, the pattern unravels. Cells break down. Chemistry slips back toward balance. There isn't evidence that experience continues without a working brain, so the silence is real. But the story of matter and energy doesn't stop. The warmth in the body drifts into the air, and the atoms that built us return to soil and water and sky. Carbon joins the breath of trees, iron carries on in the ground, and over years those atoms can become rain, leaves, even other lives. And something else remains, which isn't in the body at all. It's the changes we've made in other people, the work we left, the ripples of our choices. In that sense, we keep moving through time after we stop. We end as a self, and yet we continue as part of the world that made us. Is there any kind of consciousness after death? The first thing to notice is that consciousness is tied to a living brain. Every feeling, memory, and thought tracks activity in networks of brain cells. When the body dies, blood, oxygen, and electrical rhythms stop, and those networks fall silent. So ordinary experience doesn't continue after biological death, because the machinery that makes it has ended. People talk about near-death experiences, and there are careful records of brief surges of organized activity in a failing brain. Vivid tunnels, presences, and life reviews can arise as the brain tries to make sense of chaos. These events happen while the brain still works a little. They describe the last flickers of life, not a mind leaving the body. But if the question is any kind at all, then yes, parts persist, though not as awareness. The atoms return to air, soil, and future living things. The pattern of a life carries on in memories, habits taught to children, work left behind, genes travel forward. That's continuation of pattern, not a point of view. A conscious state needs an engine that updates itself from one moment to the next, and that engine is a living brain. Without it, there's no place for experience to occur. That can feel stark, and it also gives weight to now, because this brief flare exists at all and leaves real traces in the world. Is death painful? Pain is a signal the body sends to the brain, and death is the point when that signal can't be processed anymore. So it depends on how the end happens. In a sudden event, the brain loses blood and oxygen in seconds, and consciousness switches off quickly, often before pain can truly form. In long illness, there can be pain, but it isn't the same as the moment of dying. Medicines dull the nerves, and if needed, deep sedation lets the brain fall below the level where pain is felt. As oxygen falls and carbon dioxide rises, thinking blurs, and many people drift away from clear sensation. Some fear the body's last movements. Gasping breaths and small jerks look harsh, but they're often reflexes of a brainstem working on autopilot. Hospice teams see this often, and they watch that the face relaxes and the brow is smooth, which are clues that suffering isn't there in the way people imagine. It can happen in accidents or untreated disease, but care changes the picture, and biology helps as awareness narrows. Pain needs a living pattern in the brain, and that pattern fades as the end arrives. What remains, more often than not, is a brief closing of experience, and then the signal stops. Do we just stop existing? It can feel like a cliff, a hard edge. A life is a pattern running on a living brain, and that pattern is more than the atoms. It's the way they're arranged and busy. When the activity stops, the pattern stops, and the private world of thoughts and feelings goes with it. But the atoms don't vanish, and the energy doesn't fall out of the universe. The body's matter returns to the earth, and its energy spreads as heat and motion. What ends is subjective experience, because that needs a working brain. So the person ends as a someone, though the stuff continues. That sounds stark, but it also links us to everything else. The atoms in a body were made in stars, and they'll be parts of soil, air, and future lives. And the information we've written into the world remains. Skills passed on, stories told, changes made. Those ripples outlast the moment. And there's another thought. Non-existence isn't something that's felt, because feeling needs a mind. Before a life began, there was no experience, and after it ends, it's the same absence. So we don't just stop in every sense. The self stops, and the world carries on with what we left in it. What will it feel like in the moment I die? It's the question we can't rehearse, yet our bodies leave clues. Death is a process, not a switch. In the last minutes, the heart and lungs weaken, oxygen falls, and the senses narrow. Vision fades at the edges, and hearing often stays the longest. The world seems to draw into the center. As oxygen drops, the brain fires in bursts and fragments. Patterns may bloom as the visual system misfires, so lights or tunnels make sense. Time can stretch because the brain's clock loses rhythm. Pain often eases as natural painkillers spread through the body, and attention turns inward, toward memory and meaning. The sense of being a single self starts to loosen. Networks that bind thought together fall out of step, so the story breaks into scenes and feelings. Some who came close speak of reunions, warmth, or a view from above. These are brain-made experiences, but they're true as experiences. Then a final wave moves across the brain, and activity drops below the level for awareness. Breathing stops, the heart stalls, and the last signals fade. After that, there's nothing to feel, because feeling needs a working brain. So it may be less a sudden wall, more a narrowing doorway. Will I see the people I've lost again? It's the oldest hope, and it sits right next to the hardest truth. We don't know for sure. Faiths give different answers, and science can't test what happens to experience when a brain goes still. But there are things we can say about what remains and what returns. Their bodies return to Earth, and their atoms spread into air and water and food, so they go on inside living things. The light they threw off, every smile and glance, raced outward at light speed, and some of those photons still cross space now. Their touch left marks in matter and in minds. And there's the way the brain works. When we remember, we don't play a film. We rebuild a person from patterns they carved into us, so parts of them act again through our thoughts and hands. The phrases we repeat, the jokes we share, the courage we borrow, are their echoes. So, will we meet them as the same minds face to face? We might not, and we might, because the honest answer is that no one knows. But we do see them again in the moments they built in us, and in the world they changed. The universe forgets slowly, and love lingers. Why are people afraid of death? It starts with the oldest part of life. Anything that harms the body triggers alarms, and those alarms kept our ancestors alive. So the system treats death like the ultimate threat. But there's another layer. Humans can picture futures, and death is the edge where that picture won't load, which feels like a wall. The brain is a prediction engine, always asking what happens next and updating when it's wrong. Death breaks that loop because there's no next moment to correct the guess. Unknowns feel risky, so we fill them with worry. And there's control. We like to steer. Death removes the wheel, and that loss shocks us. It's also about love. Hearts are woven together, and death pulls at the threads. We fear leaving people with pain, and we fear being left. Grief is the cost of attachment, and the cost tells us the value. There's identity too. The voice that says I is our whole stage, an ending that feels like losing the world. People answer this fear with stories, with faith, with philosophy, and with plans for a life well used. Knowing time is limited can sharpen choices, and it can make kindness urgent. Matter returns to matter, and traces stay in memories and in work. The fear remains, but it can sit beside meaning and guide it. Does my life have meaning if everything ends? Endings can feel like they wipe things away. Stars burn out, bodies fail, memories fade, and the universe drifts toward thin, cold emptiness. So it's natural to ask if meaning survives that. But meaning isn't the same as lasting forever. Meaning is about how things fit together while they exist. A song ends, yet its worth is in the shape of notes as they move, and in what they change in a mind. A day ends, yet what happened in it still matters tomorrow. The universe may end in heat death, where energy spreads out and nothing much happens, but that's not now. Right now, there are islands of order where stars shine and life thinks, and that's where meaning lives. It shows up when a choice changes what follows. Teach a child to read, share a truth, build a bridge, care for someone, and the world after is not the same. Endings don't empty that change, they frame it. Because there's a span, we choose, we weigh, we aim. Value comes from the pattern a life makes, and the traces it leaves in other lives and in the world. Things end, and still, meaning is real in the time it happens. Is there a right way to think about or prepare for death? I don't think there's a single right way, because death meets each life differently, but there is a useful way. See it as part of a pattern we already live with. Things begin and end. That limit gives shape. A day is precious because it runs out, and so is a life. So thinking about death can be less about dread and more about focus. A boundary makes choices matter. It pushes attention toward what we care about and away from noise. We won't know when or how, and that's hard, but uncertainty can be carried with curiosity, like standing at the edge of a sea. Preparing can be simple and practical. Speak with the people you love and say what you want known. Write down your wishes about care and about belongings. Share passwords and stories. Thank some people. Leave a few clear instructions, not to control the end, but to lighten the load for those who stay. And prepare by living in line with your values while you can. Finish a conversation, forgive someone, or ask for forgiveness. Make a thing that lasts, or teach a skill. Take care of your health, because comfort helps. There isn't one right way, but there is this honest one, and it's enough. How will my death affect the people I care about? It will hit first as a break in a pattern. Their bodies will jolt, and the day won't fit. The brain keeps predicting your voice, your shape in a doorway, and when you're not there, it stumbles. So there's shock and confusion, and then a heavy ache settles in. Heavy. Grief is the cost of attachment. And attachment is how their brains kept them safe. They built a model of you, and it guided choices, and now it doesn't match the world. So the pain comes in waves. A tension phrase. Food tastes wrong. Time stretches and snaps back again. Lives around them shift to fill the space. Roles are passed on. Chores reshuffled, plans rewritten, and in the middle of it they tell stories. They hold photos, and they argue about small details, because that makes you real. This is how a bond continues when a body is gone. With time, the raw edge softens. The bond turns into habits and choices, recipes they cook, jokes they repeat, care they give, because you once gave it. Birthdays and small rituals become anchors. Your death will change their world twice, first by ending a chapter, and then by shaping the next. Why do sudden deaths feel unreal? Because the mind runs on prediction. Days form loops, and names and faces anchor those loops. The person sits in that web of expectation, so the brain keeps reaching for their voice and their smile. Then the pattern breaks in one sharp moment, and the silence arrives instead, and the world seems misprinted. Inside the skull, there's a model of that life built from many small repeats. A seat at the table, a contact on the phone, a key in the door. The body can vanish in seconds, but the model lingers. Shock floods the system, so time feels stretched and sounds go thin, and the mismatch deepens. We also carry a story that runs ahead. Holidays marked on a calendar, words we meant to say, a plan for next week. Sudden loss cuts the story mid-sentence, so meaning has nowhere to land. Grief is the slow rewrite, as each reminder updates the pages and disbelief fades line by line. And there's a wider truth. Nature moves without pause, cause to effect, while our understanding walks behind. The fact is immediate, but meaning takes time. So unreality is that gap. As the model catches up, reality returns, changed and steady, and what remains is the pattern of love carried forward. Why does grief come in waves? Loss doesn't switch off a feeling. It breaks a pattern the brain has used for years, and patterns don't rewrite in one go. The part of the brain that bonds is built to expect, to reach, to predict. So when the world no longer matches those predictions, emotion rises, resets, and rises again, like breath. A photo, a smell, a street corner, and the brain fires the old pathway. It expects a face and finds absence, so there's a jolt. That jolt runs through the body as stress chemicals and tight muscles. Then control returns for a while, because attention shifts and the system saves energy. Grief eases not by erasing love, but by teaching the brain a new map. Learning happens in steps, and the nervous system naturally swings between effort and rest. So there are gaps. And then another cue comes, or a thought appears in a still moment, and the wave lifts again. Over time, the brain updates more of the map, and the peaks spread out. The bond doesn't end, it changes place, from expecting presence to carrying meaning. So grief feels tidal because love is learned in the body, and unlearning expectation happens in pulses. That's why it comes and goes. Why do anniversaries of loss affect us? Dates shouldn't matter, yet they do. A number on a calendar arrives and the air seems different. Our brains aren't clocks, they're pattern finders, and they tie memories to seasons and places and smells. So when the same light falls through the same window, the old network wakes and the day feels charged. Memory isn't a file we open, it's something we rebuild, and it brings feeling with it. The brain stores who was there, what was heard, and how the body felt. When the cues line up, the body echoes the past, heart and breath and stress, so the loss returns as present experience. But there's more. We make anniversaries on purpose because we need shape around chaos. A marked day lets a family pause and speak a name, and that act keeps a thread unbroken. It hurts because the bond still works, and it helps because meaning grows when we share and remember. Clock time flows forward, but lived time loops, and some loops run through one day each year. The past doesn't come back, yet it stands beside the present for a moment. We feel the weight and the worth together, and the day says the love is real and ongoing. Why do some people fear losing others more than dying themselves? It sounds strange at first, but it fits how minds are built. We're social creatures, and our sense of self stretches around the people we love. So losing them doesn't feel like a distant event. It feels like part of us being torn away, here and now. What's more, we can picture their absence in detail. The empty chair at dinner, the phone that stays dark, the plans that stop. The brain predicts that pain and makes us brace for it. But our own death has no point of view, so the mind stalls, and the fear feels blurrier. There's also control. We can choose to face risk to ourselves, and choice gives meaning. But we can't choose for someone else, and that helplessness bites. Our attachments are safety maps learned over years, so when a person vanishes, the map tears, and the world looks larger and less knowable. And there's identity. The people we love set the rhythm of our days and hold our stories in place. Without them, meaning loosens and pain arrives inside life. We still have to live. Dying is a door we can't look through, but losing them leaves us here, and that's why it can feel worse. Why do reminders of death make us anxious? Because our minds were shaped to keep us alive, and death is the one threat we can't outrun. A reminder lights up the body's alarm. Heart quickens, breath tightens, thoughts race. It clashes with the everyday habit that tomorrow will arrive, so the system shouts even when nothing is happening. The anxiety also comes from not knowing. We don't know when, how, or what it's like. Minds like patterns and control, so they make plans. Death is the end of plans and the end of control. We carry a story of self that expects to continue, and the thought of an unfinished line breaks the flow. There's a social root too. We're built to attach and protect our group, so the loss of a person or our own absence threatens those bonds. Cultures build beliefs, rituals, and symbols to soften that blow. When a reminder cuts through, those buffers wobble, and we cling harder to meaning and belonging. That's why the feeling is sharp, but it isn't only fear, it's also a signal. It pushes care and caution, and it nudges us to spend our time on things that count. In that way, reminders of death tie anxiety to value. The ache is the price of awareness, and it points toward what matters. Why does grief feel physical? Grief hits the body because the bond we built wasn't just in thoughts, it was wired into us. When a bond breaks, the brain reads danger, and the same alarm that answers injury switches on. Heart racing, chest tight, stomach sinking. To that ancient system, being left and being hurt feel close. Inside, a pain network lights up that doesn't care much whether the threat is a cut or a loss. Stress chemicals surge, so blood shifts to muscles, and digestion eases off, and breathing shortens. Muscles brace like armor. Nerves fire more easily, so touch stings, and the head throbs, and the chest aches. We're also built to stay near our people, and that system runs deep. When someone is gone, the mind keeps predicting their voice and step, and each miss lands like a bruise. A long nerve from brain to heart and gut carries the shock, so there's heaviness, nausea, shaking, and sudden tears. It feels physical for a reason, because the body is trying to protect and to teach. It slows us, pushes us to reach for others, and gives time to rewrite the map of a shared life. The signals ease as patterns change. The ache stays as proof that the bond mattered. Why do some people avoid places tied to loss? We stitch memory to space like thread through cloth, and our brains predict who belongs where. So a doorway, a chair, a street corner isn't just wood and stone, it's expectation. We turn the corner and the world looks the same, but it isn't, and that mismatch stings. The body learns fast because it has to keep us safe, so it marks the scene. The place becomes a cue, and the cue brings a wave. Heart up, breath tight, stomach heavy. Avoiding feels like control. It's a way to steer around the ambush and buy time to heal. But something else happens if we never go back. The prediction stays frozen, and the place can't learn a new meaning. So the fear stays sharp. Small steps help. Stand nearby. Go with someone. Make a new moment. The old memory remains, and a second layer begins to grow. Because grief isn't trying to erase, it's trying to protect. We avoid the cafe or the path because love is still alive there, and the map is torn. When we're ready, returning is a way to stitch the map again, so the place can hold the loss without breaking us. Why does grief change our behavior? Well, because our minds don't just store people as memories, they wire them into our plans. We build a map that says where they are and what they mean, and we act on it every day. When someone dies, that map is wrong, and the brain moves into search and alarm. So attention narrows, habits stall, and rules appear to keep us safe. Those shifts come from very old systems. The same chemistry that bonds us also drives the ache when the bond breaks, and the body floods with stress signals. Heart rate rises, appetite changes, and thinking gets foggy because the alarm circuits shout over the planning ones. So we avoid, or we search. It isn't a mistake. It's a feature of a social species. Tears and stillness draw others near, so help arrives, and the group holds. And the mind loops through memories, not to suffer, but to update the map. We test the new truth from many angles, and the model starts to change. Because a person isn't just outside us, they're built into our sense of self. Their voice sets the rhythm of days, and when it stops, our identity stumbles, then learns a different step. Time helps because experience teaches the brain the new pattern. The love remains, but the map fits the world again. Why do some deaths feel unfair? Because we carry a picture of how a life should unfold, and a strong sense of fairness shaped by living in groups. We expect effort to matter, promises to hold, cause to match result. So when death cuts across that picture, the mind says, something broke the rules we trust. We think life has a shape. Children are meant to grow old. Risks should match reward. Care should buy time. When a young life ends, or a careful person is struck by chance, it violates that shape. The brain compares the world we see with the life that might have been, and the gap burns. But nature isn't built around our rules. It runs on cause and chance, not on who deserves what. Cells copy, and sometimes they go wrong. Weather turns, roads cross, tiny choices meet at the worst moment. When a death could have been prevented, it feels sharper, because we sense that a human choice mattered. So the feeling comes from a collision. Human fairness meets a universe that isn't keeping score. It hurts, and it also moves us. We change habits. We build safer systems. We try to spare others that loss. In that way, the feeling points forward, a vow that time is precious and not to be wasted. Why do we struggle with final goodbyes? Maybe because our minds are built for return, not for endings. We learn people like we learn sunrise times, through rhythm and repetition. The body starts to expect a voice, a hand, a small routine. So when a goodbye says never again, the pattern breaks, an alarm goes off. Attachment isn't poetry. It's wiring for survival. Being close quiets the inner watchman, and separation turns the watch back on. Heart rate climbs, nights get restless, thoughts loop. But memories keep the person present, bright and near. So biology says they're gone, while memory says they're here, and the mind pulls both ways. There's also time. We don't live inside calendars, we live inside expectations. The brain runs little futures, and most futures include another meeting, another message, another ordinary day. A final goodbye wipes those futures out in one sweep. Grief is that redrawing, the slow update to a world with one absence. And meaning sits underneath. Bonds aren't just pleasant, they shape identity, like roots shaping a tree. A goodbye feels final because it asks the story to go on without a co-author. So we struggle, and then we carry, in routines and choices and memories, and that carrying is love continued. Why does the body shut down in a set order? It isn't a strict timetable, but there is a pattern because life runs on a steady flow of oxygen and energy. When that flow falls, the body triages. It protects the core that can still save the whole, and it lets go of the parts that can wait. That choice is built in. Blood is shunted toward the heart and brain, and away from skin, gut, and limbs, so they cool and slow. Digestion pauses. Kidneys cut urine to hold water and pressure. The thinking cortex loses consciousness quickly because it needs constant fuel, but the brainstem keeps breathing and heartbeat going for a while. If the heart fails first, circulation collapses and the brain follows within minutes. If the brain fails first, the heart still beats for a short time, but without coordination, the pump falters. When blood stops, cells burn through their last reserves. Pumps in their membranes fail, salts flood in, and the machinery breaks. This order exists because evolution set priorities, and because every part depends on another. The body saves what might save it, hoping help arrives, and only then yields the rest. Even after death, different tissues fade at different rates. So the pattern we see is the system unwinding, from the center outward. Why does the brain stay active after the heart stops? It surprises us because we imagine life is a single switch, but the body is a set of clocks that slow at different rates. When the heart stops, blood flow ends, but the brain doesn't shut off at once. Neurons still hold a little oxygen and sugar, and their circuits keep firing for a short while. As oxygen falls, the cell's energy drops, and the balance between braking and driving signals changes. Inhibition fades first, so networks can surge. For a brief window, the brain can show fast rhythms, even gamma waves, seen in animals and in rare patients. It's the system working hard while the fuel runs out. Then the chemistry slips past a point. Neurons can't hold their charge, and a spreading wave rolls across the cortex, switching signaling off as it goes. This can take minutes. If blood returns quickly, cells may recover. If not, injury spreads. The brainstem can still trigger gasps and reflexes for a short time. So, the brain stays active after the heart stops because biology has momentum, and complex systems wind down in stages, not in a snap. There's a narrow window when life can return if flow is restored. After that, activity ends, connections fail, and what was a living pattern is gone. Why do people sometimes regain clarity right before death? Stories of a person lost in confusion, then suddenly clear, are common at bedsides. There's a name for it: terminal lucidity. It's rare and unpredictable. It isn't magic, and it isn't a trick of memory. A brain at the edge is still alive, and living systems can shift suddenly. As the body shuts down, chemistry can change fast. There's a last push of fuel as cells burn what's left, and a burst of brain chemicals that wake circuits. Inflammation may fall for hours, and networks that were blocked can free up. For a brief window, recognition and language can rejoin. There's also a shift in priorities. Tired circuits go quiet as energy drops, and the strongest patterns remain. Old habits, faces, names, the songs of a life hold on. It's like a city in a blackout where a few streets keep power, and all attention flows along those lit paths. And there's meaning. Short-term memory might be broken, but deep memories can endure. Families hold these moments because they matter, so the story travels. It doesn't remove the unknown. It shows a living brain still trying to organize itself and making space for one more clear meeting with the world. Why do life review moments happen? When the body thinks it's at the edge, the brain shifts into emergency mode, and that changes how we experience time and memory. Stress chemicals, like noradrenaline, surge, and memory networks go vivid. Attention narrows, so moments feel longer, and the mind reaches for what's most meaningful because that's what might guide action. The brain is built to predict, so in a crisis, it searches the past for patterns that could help now. It doesn't play every scene, it compresses, and it pulls the brightest ones first. Faces, mistakes, triumphs. It can feel like a fast flipbook of a life, dense with meaning and stripped of filler. Near death, oxygen may drop or return in a surge, and the brain can spark with short, intense rhythms that tie distant areas together. Some studies in people and animals show bursts like this. When far parts link at once, memory can stitch wide, so a whole-of-life picture appears, not as film, but as pattern. Stories we carry can shape the frame. So what's recalled often matches what a person valued. And whether it's only the brain or something we don't yet grasp remains an open question. But the effect makes sense. A mind built from memories, facing an edge, shows its map back to itself, and that feels like a review. Why does awareness fade before the body fails? It's striking that thought thins while the heart still beats. Awareness is the brain's most delicate work, and it runs on tight margins. Neurons burn energy fast, and they need steady oxygen and sugar. When blood flow slips, the first failure is connection. The rich web loosens before the sturdy parts of the body. Conscious experience needs many distant areas to talk at once, and that chorus takes power. If oxygen drops, or carbon dioxide rises, or chemistry drifts, the links go fuzzy. The brainstem keeps basic rhythm, but the higher loops fall quiet. The heart has its own pacemaker, so it can carry on for a while. That's why people near the end can fade in and out, or speak in fragments, even as pulse and breath continue. The brain focuses on the basics, keeping the lights on for what keeps the body alive. Memory, language, and the sense of self are expensive, so they're the first to dim. Hearing and simple feeling often last longer. There's also help from medicine, which softens awareness to ease suffering. But the deeper reason is this order in our biology. The body runs on sturdy cycles with backups. The mind is a pattern that needs precision. When energy runs short, patterns fail before parts. So awareness fades while the body keeps going. Why is the exact moment of death hard to define? Life in a body isn't a single switch. It's a web of systems holding each other up. Heart, lungs, brain, hormones, nerves. They fade at different speeds. We once said death was when breathing and the pulse stopped, but now we can restart both with CPR, shocks, and machines, so that line moved. Today, the core idea is irreversibility, and it's centered on the brain. If the brain and brainstem can't ever recover their integrated function, we call that death. But neurons don't all go dark at once. Activity dwindles. Some cells hang on for minutes or hours, especially if it's cold, and oxygen demand falls. Because of that, the border depends on context and tools. A warm room gives one window, an icy river gives a longer one. We can't monitor every synapse, and our tests sample and infer. So we use careful criteria, but they're thresholds. Meanwhile, many tissues stay alive for a while, with reflexes and gene activity. So, the moment is really a short transition where parts cross their limits at different times. The legal line is a human choice, guided by biology and by the need to act. As medicine advances, it shifts. What ends, finally, is the body's ability to work as one thing. That's the point that doesn't return. Why do some people speak to unseen people before dying? It often begins as the body changes, and the brain has to work with thin signals. Oxygen can drop, carbon dioxide can rise, and chemistry shifts. So perception wobbles, and the mind fills gaps, and it fills them with what it trusts most, which is people and voices. Perception is a guess, guided by memory. When the senses blur, the brain leans harder on its own models, so a face from childhood or a partner long gone can appear with weight and detail. Some people feel a presence at the edge of the bed and the sound of their name because the social brain is vivid. Medicines can add to this, and so can fever, infection, or organ failure. Thoughts can loosen. We call that delirium, but it isn't always chaos. The mind often brings familiar guides, and that reduces fear, so conversations begin. Stories from many cultures match this pattern, and families see people settle enough to let go. So the best evidence explains how it can happen, but it can't decide what it means. It tells us about the brain's state, not the truth of the visitors. Either way, we see a mind-protecting connection as the horizon comes close, speaking to the faces that shaped its world. The question is, why do near-death states distort time? We think clocks measure time, but the brain doesn't read a clock. It builds time from change in the world and in us. The brain is the timekeeper we live inside. In danger, those changes come fast. Attention narrows and arousal rises. So the brain samples more and the moment feels thicker. When that happens, memories get written in higher detail, like more frames per second. Later, the memory plays back slow, so we swear time stretched. Stress chemistry can also speed neural traffic. That helps because more detail means better odds in the next heartbeat. Time feels wide because the brain is working wide. Near the edge, oxygen falls and activity can surge then break apart. Fast brain rhythms can flare after the heart stops. Networks that track sequence and self can lose their anchors. Without a firm before and after, moments run together, so the world can feel timeless. It's not a clock breaking, it's the timeline loosening. So physics carries on at a steady pace, but the mind's clock bends to keep us alive and make sense of endings. It can stretch a second into a story, or fold a life into a blink. Not to trick us, but to let meaning fit in what remains. That's a deep kindness of a mortal brain. Why does the dying mind sometimes produce vivid imagery? Something striking happens as the body falters. The brain doesn't switch off like a light. It runs on for minutes, sometimes longer, and it's built to guess what's out there. When the senses fade, the guessing grows louder. So the inner model paints scenes and faces and places from memory, trying to keep reality continuous. As oxygen falls and carbon dioxide rises, the chemistry spikes. Stress signals surge, and natural painkillers spread, which can sharpen images and soften fear. Circuits that usually keep activity tidy start to slip, so the visual cortex fires on its own. The retina can dim from the edges, making tunnels and bright centers. Body maps can wobble too, so people feel lifted from themselves. And memory systems open wide. Old scenes, strong feelings, and unfinished threads can flood in together because the brain is trying to compress a lifetime into a clear pattern. Time stretches, moments thicken, and a single image can carry the weight of years. Culture nudges the form, so some see guides or loved ones, others see landscapes or light. Whether that points beyond biology is a different question. But even within nature, it makes sense. The mind's last work is to hold meaning together and ease fear. And it does that by showing us something vivid. Why do some people remain conscious longer than expected? We think of consciousness switching off like a light, but the brain isn't a switch. It's a living network that winds down in stages, so there's a window where parts keep working while others fail. Unexpected depends on the situation and on what we're able to measure. After the heart stops, there's still some oxygen and sugar in the brain, and if the body is cold, cells use it more slowly. Blood may trickle for a short time, and stress hormones can keep arousal circuits firing. Hearing pathways are sturdy, so awareness can linger even as other systems fade. In hospitals and accidents, anesthesia or trauma adds more variation. The same dose doesn't affect everyone the same because of body size, genetics, and drug tolerance. Pain and shock change the chemistry so people can break through. Monitors track signals, but they're proxies. A quiet monitor doesn't guarantee no experience. Near the end, the brain can show a last burst of fast, organized rhythms, the kind we see in vivid awareness. It may last seconds, but stress stretches time, so those seconds feel larger. None of this shows mind without brain. It shows a stubborn brain finishing its work, then stopping. The question is, why do different cultures picture death so differently? Because we draw the unknown using what we know, and every place knows something different. A rice field watches life fall and rise each year, so endings feel like cycles. A desert teaches one hard line between day and night, so people imagine judgment and a final crossing. Stories grow from landscape. Rituals don't just describe death, they hold people together. If life turns on family lines, the dead stay in household with offerings and graves nearby. If order depends on law, the afterworld becomes a court, with reward and punishment. Where rivers carry trade, ferrymen and coins appear, and crossings explain departures. History shifts the picture too. Plagues paint bones and scythes because fear needs a face. Empires promise fame beyond the grave. Reincarnation fits a world that sees selves as threads through time. Resurrection fits a world that hopes one life can be restored. Tunnels appear, and stories give them meaning. Modern medicine turns dying into numbers and machines, so some imagine failure, and others imagine care made human. Media mixes symbols until borders blur. Every picture makes loss bearable, passes values on, and answers what kindness and courage look like. We picture death to decide how to live. Why do people look for signs from the dead? Because the bond doesn't switch off when a heartbeat stops. The person lives on in our heads as a map of habits and voice and touch, and that map keeps predicting. We reach for the phone, we set an extra place, we hear their laugh in a crowd, and we notice. Brains are built to spot patterns and causes, because missing a signal once could have been costly. So a flicker of light, a bird at the window, a song on the radio can feel chosen. We sense a mind behind chance, and it stitches meaning to noise, and it softens the ache. Grief also asks for something to do. Rituals give our hands a task and our hearts a rhythm, and looking for signs becomes a way to keep talking. It holds a thread between worlds, so daily life doesn't feel like a cliff. It's a small claim of order when the future feels loose. Some events are just random, and that matters. But the reach itself is real, because memory is active. Love rewires the brain, and the trace keeps shaping attention and choice. So people look for signs to keep a conversation going while they learn a new world, where absence and presence sit side by side. Why do some people feel watched after a loss? Loss breaks a pattern the brain has relied on. For years, it predicted a face in a doorway and a voice in the next room, so the model keeps running even when the person is gone. Those predictions fire, and the mind checks the room, and a presence seems near. Because the social brain is tuned to watch and be watched. It keeps guard for eyes and voices that matter, and it's jumpy when patterns change. A creak, a shadow, a shape in a coat can tip it. Brief sights or a whisper at the edge of hearing are common, and they're usually harmless. Grief also bends attention toward meaning. The mind tries to stitch order into the gap, so it tests the idea that the person is still near, because that lowers stress for a moment. Culture shapes what follows. Some call it a spirit, others call it memory, but the feeling starts in the same machinery. With time, prediction and reality slowly align. The brain updates the model, and the sudden checks fade, or they turn into quiet habits like touching a photograph. What remains isn't surveillance, but connection. A life leaves patterns in a mind and a place, and feeling watched softens into being carried by what endures. Why do we hope dying is peaceful? Because endings scare us. and hope is the way the mind walks toward them without running. We fear pain, and we fear losing control, so we picture an exit without struggle. Stories help, from bedside whispers to old myths. They take a hard edge and round it so we can face it. And there's a reason the hope isn't foolish. The body has its own painkillers, and near the end the brain can flood with them. Breathing changes, oxygen levels fall, and awareness narrows, so pain often becomes distant. Good medicine adds to that. Hospice teams ease symptoms, and many people grow drowsy and less distressed. So hope also works like a tool. It lets a family focus on care, on holding hands, on words that matter, instead of bracing for horror. It protects dignity, because a life feels whole when its ending fits the person, and it softens grief by promising that love can outlast fear in that room. Because death is the edge of what can be known, and the mind hates a blank. So we sketch a kinder border, and we hope the last sensation is release, not struggle. Often, biology and care make that true. And even when we can't be sure, that hope feels honest to what we value. Why do we want death to contain meaning? Because endings are hard to face if they're blank. Our minds search for patterns and causes, and death looks like a wall with no picture. So we reach for meaning, not as a trick, but to keep the story of a life connected. We're storytellers by nature, and stories need endings that fit. Pattern seeking helped our ancestors survive, because finding a shape in the dark could save a life. The unknown scares us, and death is the biggest unknown. So communities build rituals and beliefs, and grief has a path to walk. Meaning turns raw loss into a shared shape, and people can stand together. When time is limited, choices gain weight, because each one costs a day you won't get back. If death matters, then how we live matters. We pass love and knowledge forward, so a life ripples on. Even stars end, and their ashes become planets and people, not by plan, but by the laws of nature. We're not saying the universe writes meanings for us, but we make them, and they guide us. They help us place the end within the whole. They steady the hand at the door we all must open. We want death to contain meaning, because meaning is how we stay human. Why do people wonder if consciousness continues? It starts with the feeling of being a mind moving through time. Experience doesn't arrive in pieces, it flows. And because it has never switched off in our awareness, it's hard to picture a final stop. Death places a wall in that flow, so the mind asks whether the stream slips through anyway. Brains predict the next moment, and memory stitches yesterday to today, so a tomorrow is always assumed. We can imagine next week, next year, and even a far future self, but we can't imagine not being here at all. That gap pulls on us, and grief deepens it, because love doesn't accept an instant absence. Across cultures, stories offer paths through the wall, souls, rebirth, return. And there are striking reports at the edge of life, bright scenes and meetings that feel more real than real. The brain under strain can create powerful patterns, so they're not proof, but they keep the door open in imagination. From science, consciousness looks like a process in the brain, a living pattern fed by energy and information. And when the process ends, the experience ends. Yet the wonder persists, because how matter becomes feeling is still a deep puzzle. So the question stays, and it turns us toward the value of now. Why do we fear being forgotten? We fear being forgotten because we're built for one another. For most of our history, survival depended on being held in other minds. If the group remembered us, we ate, we healed, we had help. So attention felt like safety, and being ignored felt like danger, deep in the body. And there's another layer. The brain knits moments into a story, and we call it a self. A story wants witnesses, because witnesses make it real. If no one holds it when we're gone, it feels like the story ends twice, once in us and once in the world. So we look for ways to keep the thread going. So we leave traces, names on stones, photos, lines of code, songs, children, and small kindness that become habits in strangers. Effects outlast causes. A teacher's question hangs in a student's choice years later, and that choice nudges another life. Memory spreads, and we hope our part travels, because carried by others, we feel less alone against time. On vast timescales, every name fades, even the grand ones. But matter and energy go on, and in people, influence does too, braided into culture and place. The fear is a compass, pointing toward care and craft now. Under it is a wish for our small life to connect. Why do near-death stories feel convincing? They arrive from the edge, and edges make things vivid. The brain is under threat, so it floods the system with attention and feeling. Vision can narrow, and a bright center appears because oxygen falls and signals collapse toward the middle. Sounds and touch still leak in, and the mind treats them as facts. In crisis, the brain runs its model faster, so moments seem to stretch. It looks like time slows, but it's prediction working hard. A stable story forms because the brain hates gaps, and it fills them with patterns it knows. If hearing was active, bits of talk join the scene and feel placed with certainty. Then comes memory, which isn't a recorder, it's a builder. The first recall sets the frame, and each retelling strengthens it. So doubt fades and meaning grows. Culture gives templates, like tunnels, relatives, or landscapes, and the brain uses them because they fit. The feelings are real, and the story carries that reality. And there's another layer. Consciousness is a live model of the world, and we live inside it. So an intense model feels like truth. Near-death stories are convincing because they capture that intensity. They don't settle what lies beyond, but they show what matters at the edge. Connection, meaning, and the wish to stay. Why do people sense the presence of lost loved ones? I think it begins with how the brain works. It's a prediction engine trained by love and routine. Every day, it learns where a person ought to be and what they might say. When that person dies, the world changes fast, but the brain's maps don't. So it keeps expecting them, and that expectation has a feeling. Many people have brief moments. A voice behind a door, a familiar footstep, a smell in a room. It isn't madness. Memory is stored in patterns that can light up the senses from the inside. Like people who still feel a missing arm, the bonfires, and the brain produces the sense that someone is there. Our social radar is tuned to avoid missing a person who matters. A false alarm costs little, but missing them would have cost a lot. For most of our history, grief turns the dial up. When tired, stressed, or on the edge of waking, the brain can project voices and shapes onto faint noise. Culture then gives the experience its meaning, as a sign, a blessing, or a memory flaring. Whatever the story, the core is simple. Love has rewired the brain, and models don't vanish overnight. So the presence is the model felt from the inside, and it's how a bond keeps moving with a living life. Why do people imagine death as a transition, not an end? Maybe it begins with how life feels from the inside. We're always mid-sentence, moving from one moment to the next, and stories don't end with a blank wall. Brains predict the next frame, because that keeps us alive. So a hard stop is hard to imagine, and a passage feels truer. We also learn by watching the world turn. Day returns after night, tides pull back and come again, forests fall and feed new growth. Stars burn out and scatter their ash, and that ash becomes planets and people. So nature trains us to see change not as vanishing, but as handover. Inside the mind, there's another reason. The self is a process, renewed by memory and habit, so continuity is our default. We don't spot the exact moment a child becomes an adult, yet we accept the shift. Faced with death, we project one more step because that's the pattern we trust. What follows is the hard part. We don't have evidence that awareness carries on, but matter does, and effects do. Our acts ripple through other lives, and our atoms rejoin earth and sky. So the end looks like a doorway, because almost everything we know becomes something else when it ends. Why do some people sense death coming? It's an unsettling idea. Some people say they felt something shift. Not a prophecy, more like recognition. The body changes as systems wind down, and the brain is built to read patterns long before we can put them into words. When blood chemistry drifts, the heart tires, oxygen drops, and carbon dioxide rises. Those changes can sway mood, focus, and the sense of time. People notice odd fatigue, a sudden ease or a letting go, pain easing, distant sounds seeming close. The brain stitches these tiny signals together, and a feeling forms before reasons do. But stories can grow in memory, because we remember the hits and forget the misses. Families carry hints from doctors, numbers, and faces, and we pick them up without saying them aloud. Our bodies broadcast quiet signs in posture, skin, and breath, and others read them without noticing. In hospice, there are common signs near the end: less hunger, less talk, day-night rhythm changes. There are strange moments too, like a brief rally called terminal lucidity, or vivid dreams near the end. They don't set a clock, but they matter, because meaning can ease fear. So when someone senses death, it may be two things at once: the body speaking, and the mind making sense. That thought feels steady, and it lets the moment be what it is. Why do animals react differently around death? Maybe because death isn't one thing in an animal's mind. It's a smell, a sudden silence, an empty space where a body used to move. Each species meets that moment with the tools it has and the lives it leads, shaped by danger, disease, hunger, and attachment. So the same event carries different meanings. Ants and bees treat a dead body like a task. Oils change on the surface, so they carry it away to keep the nest safe. Crows gather around a fallen crow, and it looks like a vigil, but it also maps risk. Herd animals pause and watch, because predators watch too. Predators may feed, yet even they test the air first, because death can hide poison or a rival. And in long-lived social species, something else appears. Elephants, whales, and primates form deep bonds over years, so when one is lost, they search, they wait, they carry, as if holding a thread. Is that grief in a human sense, or a weave of learning, stress, and care? It's likely both simpler and real. Brains built for bonding protest the break, and bodies act. Across life, death signals danger, reshapes groups, and teaches edges. The reactions differ because life writes many ways to go on. Why do some people fear eternity? It's odd, isn't it? People fear death because it ends, and eternity because it doesn't. Minds grew inside days and seasons, so beginnings and endings feel like home. They give rhythm and shape. Take the ending away, and the future stops feeling like a path. It feels like a horizon that never arrives. Birthdays are special because there's one a year, and fireworks because they vanish as soon as they bloom. A song that never stops turns into noise, and a joke told forever dies on the second telling. Endings create value because they force choice, and choice makes a life. Eternity dissolves that pressure. The self is a pattern that keeps going by changing. Brains clear and rebuild, and days have pauses so memory doesn't flood. In a span without edges, stories blur. Given endless time, every path is taken, and repetition eats surprise. Some imagine that as boredom without exit, which feels like a trap. For others, the fear is stranger. If eternity means awareness without a body, what anchors the sense of self? If it means joining something vast, does the person vanish? The scale is unknown, and unknowns can scare. Maybe what we want isn't forever, but enough. Moments with edges, held long enough to matter. Why do certain places feel closer to death? Some places pull the horizon in, a cliff edge, an ICU, a cemetery at dusk. They don't change what death is, but they change what we notice. Our brains keep a running map of risk and time, and some landscapes light that map up because their signals are hard to ignore. On the edge of a drop or over deep water, the body runs old code. Vision narrows, heart rate climbs, and we rehearse what could go wrong. That's useful because ancestors who paid attention there tended to live. Hospitals feel close too, not from height, but from the sight of failing bodies and urgent machines. Places carry memory as well. A battlefield, a crash site, a train line with flowers. We learn their stories, and the mind runs the ending again, so the air feels loaded, and some places stretch time. A desert, a glacier, an old volcano. Life is thin there, and the rock shows how everything wears down. So the feeling isn't superstition. It's a clear signal that the margin is narrow here, or that time is deep here, or that others ended here. And when that lands, attention steadies. We stand a little straighter and we measure our choices. It feels like a warning, and it simply affirms that we're alive. Why does loss reshape identity? Because identity isn't a solid thing, it's a living pattern made of relationships, routines, and hopes. We learn who we are by how we fit with others, and by the roles we share with them. When someone we love disappears, one of the main threads is cut, and the pattern loosens. The brain builds a model of the world that predicts what will happen next, including a voice at the door and a name on the screen. Loss breaks those predictions. So the model has to update, and that hurts because change takes effort and shakes meaning. While it updates, our sense of self shifts. It also changes what we do each day. Shared habits fall away, and empty spaces appear in small places like meals, and in big places like plans. New tasks land in our hands, and people meet us in new ways. Action by action, the person we are rehearsing becomes different, and memory steers it. And there's a deeper part. Loss shows that time is finite, so values come into sharper focus, and priorities move. We choose what to carry forward and what to let go, and those choices add contour to identity. It reshapes us because life must keep going, and we decide how to go on. Why do funerals feel both comforting and unsettling? We come together in a room and everything slows. There's a photo, a name spoken, a song. Ritual gives shape to something wild, because grief blows in all directions, so the order helps. We know when to stand, when to speak, when to sit, and that steadies us. It feels like rails laid on a steep hill. We're built to cope in groups, and a crowd tells the body it isn't alone. Hands meet, shoulders touch, and that simple contact changes how pain lands. Stories are shared like threads, and they stitch a person back into memory. Our minds like patterns, so the ceremony's steps lower the noise. But the same path leads to the edge. The coffin, the urn, the empty chair make time feel real. We see that a life can stop, and the thought turns back on us. One day, it's our name. That flicker wakes a deep alarm because staying alive matters. So funerals comfort by giving grief a place, and they unsettle by pointing at the truth underneath everything. We're social minds inside mortal bodies. The ritual holds us steady, while the fact of death moves the ground. We keep our balance by holding both. It feels heavy and kind at once, and that's honest. Why do some people seek out danger? There's a pull at the edge of things, and for some brains, it feels like home. When we face a real threat, the body floods with adrenaline, and the brain releases dopamine. Focus sharpens, colors seem brighter, time stretches a little, because the system is asking, survive this, and remember how. For some, that feels rewarding. That pull didn't appear from nowhere. In our past, someone had to walk first into the dark valley to find water, and sometimes that person saved the group. Populations work when there's a mix of cautious planners and bold explorers, so both strategies stayed. And younger people risk more because their control systems are still tuning. Fear itself can feel like information. If the world is uncertain, turning toward the wave can give a sense of control because the choice is yours. Death sits in the background like a horizon, and some answer it by stepping closer, not to end life, but to test the line and find who they are. In danger, the brain writes in bold, so the day seems longer and lasting. Bonds form faster because shared risk is sticky in memory. So many aren't chasing death at all. They're chasing a vivid life where the boundary is clear and the heart answers back, I'm here, and it matters. Why do last conversations stay sharp in memory? Endings switch on our attention. The brain is always predicting the next moment, and when a meeting turns out to be the last, that prediction fails. The surprise and the weight of it collide, and the mind marks the boundary. Edges of experience leave cleaner lines than middles, so we look closer without meaning to. Strong emotion helps the brain tag and store. The alarm system deep in the brain talks to the memory system, and stress chemicals press the record button a little harder. That's why we remember the exact turn of a phrase, the room, the light, even the pause. Importance sharpens perception and keeps it. Then we rehearse it. We replay that talk on the way home, and in the night, and in the days after, because we're trying to make sense. We tell others, and each telling carves the lines deeper. Social bonds depend on memory, so the mind protects last exchanges like family heirlooms. And there's meaning. A last scene gathers the story behind it, so it carries more weight than an ordinary minute. It's memory acting like a map legend at the edge of the page. They stay sharp because they mark the line between presence and absence, and we honor lines like that. Why do regrets intensify after loss? Loss draws a hard line in time. There's a before and an after, and the future paths collapse into one. Our minds are built to compare possibilities, and when options vanish, the differences become stark. So we notice the forks we missed, and the noticing itself sharpens feeling. That sharpness is regret. Normally, those if-only thoughts help us learn, because we can still act. After loss, action ends, but the simulation keeps running. It can't correct itself, so it circles, and each pass adds detail. Stress and grief prime memory, so tiny choices glow with significance, even when they weren't decisive at all. We also reach for control. Chaos feels unbearable, so we tell stories where our choices could have changed the end. Regret offers a handle, even if it hurts, because pain with a reason feels safer than pain without one. Attachment drives repair, but repair is impossible now, so the signal turns up. With time, the brain learns a new rule. This path is closed, but its lessons can move. We can answer the intensifying signal by caring in the present, by finishing conversations in how we live. We don't undo the past, we update the future. Regret shows what mattered and points us there. Why do people talk to the dead? Because the bond doesn't stop when a heartbeat does. We're built for connection, and our brains learn the rhythms of the people we love. Their voice becomes a pattern in us. and it doesn't vanish at once. So when loss tears the world, we keep speaking to steady the ground under our feet. We talk because it helps the mind update. Memory keeps a model of them, and we can run it like a small simulation, asking, what would they say? Speaking out loud turns private feeling into action, and it lowers fear and anger. It's a way to grieve and to decide at the same time. Culture gives it shape. Graves, letters, photos, prayers. The day we set aside each year. These are shared rooms where we speak. Some believe the dead can hear and some don't, but both find meaning. It ties a life to a story, and a family to time, and the living to duty. There's also a simple truth. The person is gone, but their effects aren't. They changed us, and those changes keep moving through our choices and our work. So when we talk to the dead, we're really speaking to what they left in the world and in us, and that still answers back. The question is, why do certain objects hold emotional weight after death? We know the object is just wood, metal, fabric, yet it feels heavier than that. It isn't the thing itself, it's the web around it. Our brains tie moments together, so a mug becomes mornings, and a coat becomes winter walks. When someone dies, the links remain, and the object sparks them. Because the brain learns by pairing things that happen together, the object becomes a cue. Every touch rehearsed a pattern, voice, laughter, habits, a plan for the next hour. Death breaks the pattern, but not the cue, so it fires. There's no answer, and that gap hurts. The body joins in, and it feels heavy. There's more. We hang parts of our identity on objects. I'm the one who cooked with that spoon, who learned on that guitar. Take away the person, and the object holds the shape of the life around them. It lets us keep a thread across time. Holding it helps the brain let love stay without expectation. That's why cultures keep relics in rooms and rings. Not because matter traps a soul, but because a tiny piece of matter can stabilize a vast inner world. The object doesn't bring them back, but it opens the path to them in us. And walking that path is how we go on. Why do some people avoid hospitals and cemeteries? Because they're places that make the facts of being alive impossible to ignore, and that's heavy. Our brains are tuned to spot illness and danger, so the smell of disinfectant, the sound of monitors, the sight of grief, all say, keep away. It's a simple survival rule meeting a complex modern world, and cemeteries place time in stone, and that can feel final. In hospitals, we meet uncertainty. Someone we love might get better, or not, and we can't control the next minute. Needles and tubes aren't just tools, they're signs that the body is fragile. Avoiding the building is a way to dodge that feeling, because it's easier to walk past than to stand in helplessness. Cemeteries do something subtle, but just as deep. Names and dates turn absence into a place, and it pulls old memories to the surface. Many cultures wrap that space in taboos, so children learn to step wide, and the habit sticks. Sometimes we avoid because grief is fresh, and avoidance buys time to heal. And there's another side. Hospitals are also where skill and courage gather, and where many journeys turn back toward life. Cemeteries hold love in the open, because every stone is proof someone mattered. Facing them can be a way to face time itself, and then choose how to spend the days we have. Why do some people dream of the dead? Because the brain keeps a model of our world, and the people we love sit right at the center of it. When we drift off, that model is updated and stitched together. Old scenes replay, missing pieces are tested, and feelings tug on memories. So familiar faces walk back in. And when someone has died, the model changes slowly, because habits and love don't switch off at once. Emotions run high, and the brain gives high priority to unfinished bonds. In dreams, the reality check is loose. so absence can turn to presence, and the mind tries out meetings that daylight can't allow. Sometimes those meetings soothe us with simple talk or a touch, and we wake steadier. Sometimes they stir fear or regret, and we face what hurts. Both can help the brain learn and file the loss. Culture and memory guide the scenes, but the purpose is the same: to integrate change. So it isn't a message from beyond in any testable sense, but it is a message from us to ourselves. The dead remain as patterns in our minds, written by years of shared days. Dreaming lets that pattern speak, so we can carry love forward, even as we accept they're gone. Why does grief return without warning? Because the mind doesn't pack loss away like a finished book. A bond is built from thousands of small moments, and each one sits in its own web of sights and sounds. A cup on a shelf, a song in a shop, the smell of rain, and the whole bond lights up again. It feels sudden because memory isn't a list, it's a network. Touch one strand, and the pattern wakes, and the body answers before thought. Heart rate shifts, throat tightens, eyes sting, and only then do we notice the trigger. It's not a choice, it's the brain doing what it learned to do, and it learned slowly. Our brains predict the world, and grief is that prediction being revised. We learn they're gone in one room, then on one street, then in a season, then at a birthday. Each new context asks the question again, so another wave rises as the map updates, and it can ache. Time inside us isn't straight. Past and present sit side by side, so love can step forward as if no time has passed. What seems sudden is the mind meeting the bond again. It isn't a failure to move on. It's the shape of attachment in a living mind, finding balance around an empty space. Why does time feel distorted after a loss? Clocks don't change after a loss, but experience does. The mind doesn't read seconds like a ruler, it measures change and expectation. When someone vanishes, the pattern that guided the days breaks, and the brain keeps looking for them. So moments stretch, snap, and feel out of place. Stress chemicals flood the system and pull attention tight, so every tick and breath stands out, and that makes time feel slow. Then the model in the head, the one that predicted voices and footsteps, fails again and again, and the mind pauses to update, which fills seconds with weight. But later, the days can blur, because memory compresses sameness. We store time by changes and landmarks, and grief strips many of them away. Meals, emails, empty rooms repeat, and without fresh markers, the record shrinks, so a week collapses in recall, while the sharp moments stay long and bright. So the distortion isn't a failure, it's a sign of a mind rebuilding its map. As new routines form and new landmarks return, the wrong guesses ease, the days separate, and time steadies around a changed life. The clocks stay steady. It's our story that learns to move again. Why do people fear dying alone? We're social from the first breath, and we survive because others watch and share and keep us safe. So the thought of a last moment with no one near presses an old alarm. For most of our history, being alone meant danger. Eyes closing without a lookout could mean we don't wake. But there's more than safety. We want our life to be witnessed because a story feels complete when someone hears the last line and nods. Without that, we worry our days scatter like dust. We want a name spoken, a hand held, a sign that what we were has landed somewhere. And the body remembers this. Pain eases when it's shared, and fear settles when a voice says it's all right. Hearts and breaths fall into rhythm near another person, and we calm. In the unknown, that rhythm is a small light. Alone, the brain guesses the worst, and the unknown grows. Yet alone isn't always lonely. Some find company in memory, in music, or in a last look at the sky, because life has already flowed into others. No life is unwitnessed, since it leaves changes behind. So the fear is natural, and it points to what we value most: connection. Why do some people feel relief after a death? Grief isn't one thing. It's a crowd of feelings. When death comes, relief can slip in alongside sorrow. Sometimes because pain has ended. Families watch someone they love struggle, and every hour stretches. The waiting is its own burden. And when the waiting ends, a tightness loosens a little. Not because they wanted the person gone, but because the hurt stopped. There's a body side to it. When someone is very ill, people live on alert. They listen for phones. They jump at small changes. They plan for bad news. That constant readiness winds the nerves like a spring. When the uncertainty ends, the brain updates the picture, and the spring eases. There's also the work of care and worry. Appointments, watches, money, decisions. It's heavy, and people carry it for months or years. Relief can mean that weight is set down, and relationships are complicated, so love can mix with anger or fear. Both can be true, and that's confusing. Relief can spark guilt, but it doesn't mean love was smaller, only that strain was real. Death also answers the hardest question: what happens next? Not in a cosmic sense, but in the family. The line is drawn, choices become clearer, and time starts moving forward again. Relief is the mind making space for living to continue. We can ache and feel lighter, all at once. Why do stories about death stay with us? Because they touch the border between what we know and what we can't see. Death is final, and final things draw attention. Our brains mark strong emotion, so those moments stick. A story about loss holds danger and care together, which stamps memory, and its ending echoes the edge we fear, so we don't look away. Stories give shape to chaos. They turn a sudden stop into steps we can walk. We see cause and effect, love and regret, and we practice choices without risk. The brain learns from imagined trials almost like from real ones, so lessons embed. That usefulness keeps the story close when life gets hard. Death also ties us to each other. A tale carries a name and a voice across time, so a person doesn't vanish. We pass it on at tables and bedsides, and it stitches families and cultures. It says a life mattered, and it sets our days inside nature's long cycle, where matter returns and nothing is wasted. They stay because they hold two truths at once: that we end, and that meaning can continue in memory, in actions, in those we change. That tension makes attention. It sharpens time. So a story about death lingers, and in the space it leaves, we feel life more clearly. Why do coincidences feel meaningful after someone dies? There's a song on the radio at the right moment, and a light flickers, and a date lines up. It's easy to feel a message in it. Our brains are built to spot patterns and connect events, because linking things kept us alive. After loss, that pattern machine runs hot. Grief changes attention and memory, so small cues linked to that person glow. A name on a truck, the smell of their jacket, a number they loved. The body is stressed and alert, and the mind tags anything that matches. When a match appears, it feels charged, because it touches a living network of memories. In a big, busy world, rare alignments happen all the time. Dates will coincide, songs will repeat, birds will land on windowsills. We remember the times that hit and forget the many that missed, so the pattern looks stronger than it is. And patterns bring a rush of rightness that reads as meaning. But there's another layer. Meaning isn't only found, it's made. After death, we build a thread that lets love continue without the person here. And coincidences are the knots that hold it. Whether or not the universe sent a sign, the feeling is real, because it marks that the bond still lives. Why do people report visions near death? People talk about tunnels, bright light, and loved ones waiting, and it sounds mysterious. But the body is failing, and the brain is pushed to its limits. Oxygen drops and carbon dioxide rises, and stress chemicals surge. Vision can narrow like a tunnel because the retina and cortex are starving, and patterns burst across the mind. As networks lose balance, odd things happen. The area that maps the body can misfire, so some people feel they're floating above themselves. Memory circuits can flare, and old scenes come fast and vivid, like a life in rapid bursts. Time sense loosens, so moments stretch, and a few seconds can feel full and wide. Culture shapes the pictures. A person raised with angels may see them, and another may see a landscape they know. Pilots losing consciousness in high G flight report the same tunnel and light, and people under anesthesia sometimes do too. It's the brain under stress, not a trick, building a scene that keeps the self in place. Does that mean the experience is meaningless? I don't think so, because meaning lives in the pattern we feel. These visions are real to the person, and many come back changed and kinder. Biology can show the how, but the last image we carry is still ours, drawn at the edge as the story closes. Why do some people fear a long decline more than death? It's curious that the final stop can feel less terrifying than the long road toward it. Death looks like a clear line, and a line is simple. A long decline is a process, and processes can take our independence, our memory, and our sense of who we are, step by step. Our brains are built to imagine what's next, so the open-endedness of decline weighs heavily. Will there be pain, confusion, or loss of control? For many, that uncertainty stings more than the idea of nothingness. A boundary ends fear, but a drawn-out erosion stretches it across months or years. There's also the fear of becoming a burden, because care takes time, money, and emotion, and pride sits deep, and identity matters. If memory thins and decisions slip away, the body remains while the person fades. Modern treatment can extend life, but not always the parts that make life feel like living. So the dread often isn't about death itself, but about losing authorship. People want a say in how their story closes, and to protect those they love. That's why some choose plans that favor comfort and clarity over time. We fear the long decline because it undoes the person before the ending. Why do some people fear sudden death more? It's the jolt of being cut off mid-sentence. The brain runs on prediction, and sudden endings break the pattern. So the body fires old alarms because it can't get ready. There's no time to brace and no control, so the threat feels bigger. It leaves a gap where an explanation should sit. Fear here is also about ties. There's no chance to say goodbye, to pass on knowledge, to set things straight. Pain can be faced, but unfinished business lingers. Lives are built around plans, and sudden death bulldozes the map. It steals the role of choice, so it feels unjust, because the ending arrives first. Not everyone fears it most. Some fear a long decline because they dread losing abilities step by step. Brains differ in sensitivity to uncertainty, and experience tunes that. A past shock can make surprises loom larger. Culture and belief matter because stories about what follows can soften or sharpen the unknown. Underneath, the fear points at what matters. It points at control, at connection, and at the wish for a life that feels finished, not cut short. When those threads are cared for along the way, suddenness loses some sting. Endings are uncertain, so meaning has to be made in motion. Why do dying people call out to loved ones? It happens so often that nurses expect it. In the final hours, the brain is tired and short of oxygen, and the chemistry of attention and memory shifts. So it reaches for what's strongest. That's usually the people who kept us safe. Attachment is an old system, and it fires. The brain predicts the world, and when signals fade, It fills the gaps with memories and the faces it trusts. End-of-life dreams and visions often feature family, sometimes already gone, and they feel vivid because the emotional circuits are loud. Hearing can last late, so a voice in the room can pull a name. We're social mammals, so distress primes us to seek the group. Hormones surge, breathing changes, and the mind turns outward for help and meaning. People also review their lives near the end. So long pathways of memory light up, and certain names rise first. And if someone expects reunion, the mind follows that map. We can't say what's on the far side, but we can see the pattern on this side. Love carves deep tracks in the brain, and those tracks are hardy when everything else is failing. So the call comes. It's biology, and it's hope, and it's the mind reaching for home. Why do final moments fascinate us? Maybe it's because time runs one way, and an ending is the clearest sign of that flow. The world feels unfinished most of the time, but a last breath, a last light, draws a line. Our brains are tuned to lines and edges, because edges say where something truly stops. We also remember ends more than middles. A burst of feeling at the finish stamps a memory, like the last note that hangs in the air. The brain uses that to judge the whole. So final moments pull sharp focus because they help us decide what the story really was. And there's a practical side. At the edge, change is fastest, and surprises live there, so attention rises. We lean in at a bedside, or at the close of a day, because endings tell us what mattered. They strip noise away, and we see values, ties, and promises with new clarity. Underneath all that is the arrow of time. Things run down and life is finite, so last moments carry weight. They mark the boundary between what can still change and what can't. We stare because boundaries make meaning, and because in that narrow place, existence feels most fully itself. Why are some deaths easier to accept? We find it easier when a life looks finished. An old person who saw seasons turn, held children, told their stories, and then stopped. Our minds like patterns and endings, because endings make sense. Acceptance isn't cold. It's what happens when reality matches the story we were already holding. We cope when there's a cause we can follow. A long illness that had a name and a path. A risk taken for a reason. Wishes respected. The chain is visible, so the shock has somewhere to go. What hurts most is the sudden break, because randomness tears the map in our heads. Time helps too. When we can say goodbye, share meals, pass on small things, the ending gains shape. If pain ends, we call it mercy, and that word lets love turn into release. Distance matters as well. A stranger in the news is numbers, but a friend is a world we know. And there's the larger frame. Life doesn't sit apart from death, it grows through it. Forests renew, families turn, and even the atoms in our bones have been many places before us. Some deaths feel easier when we can place them in that flow. The hardest are the ones that refuse a frame. Why do people hope for last words? It's strange how we lean in at the very end and listen. We know bodies fail and minds blur, but we still wait for a line. Because a life feels like a story, and stories want a last sentence. It's tidy and shareable, and it sounds like the whole picture clicking. There's also the work of grief. Loss opens a loop in the head, and it keeps spinning. A clear last line can close it, or at least slow it, because it gives us something to hold. I love you. I'm sorry. Carry on. Small words that turn into a compass. We're also trying to make order from chaos. The body is slipping and control is leaving, so a steady sentence feels like a small win. Culture teaches it too, with tidy endings and famous last lines. But dying doesn't follow stories, and speech often goes first, so we listen for a hand squeeze. In the end, the hope is about connection, not quotes. We hope for last words because we want the person to be themselves right at the edge and to pass something across. Sometimes they can't. Sometimes presence is the message. A breath shared and a held gaze can carry a whole life. Why does the mind replay moments of loss? Loss breaks a pattern the mind thought was solid. The brain runs on expectations, and it carries a map of what tomorrow should look like. When someone is gone, the map is wrong at every corner, so it plays the moment again and again, like tracing a crack to see how far it spreads. Emotion stamps memories with bright ink, so they stand out. The body's alarm tightens attention, and the memory system saves extra copies. Replay is the brain's way of learning from shocks. It asks what happened, what mattered, and what to avoid. With loss, the danger is absence, so the loop keeps trying to grasp it. There's another reason. Bonds are part of the self. A life is built around habits and shared space and unspoken plans. When the person vanishes, the self has a hole, so the mind holds their face, last words, small details, and tries to stitch the story so the world feels possible again. Over time, the replay often changes. It softens at the edges, and it visits less, because new days add weight to the new map. We make meaning through talking and ritual and small acts of remembering, and the model settles. In the end, replay is learning and love at once, and that's why it lingers. Why do old memories surface after someone dies? It happens like a tide pulling back, and the shore is covered in things we haven't seen for years. The brain ties people to places, times, and feelings, and it predicts they'll be there tomorrow. When that prediction fails, the system starts searching, and it lights up everything linked to that person. Strong emotion and surprise pour stress chemicals into the brain, sharpening attention and pulling stored scenes into view. The part that knits together episodes, call it the hippocampus, uses tiny cues. A song, a smell, a street corner. One cue opens many doors. And old rooms are often first because they're deeply wired. Also, the mind tries to make sense. It builds a story that fits the loss, so it scrolls back to the start and to turning points. Early laughter, a first trip, an argument mended. Unfinished plans tug as well, because the brain keeps open threads active and it revisits them, looking for a way to settle them. There's another reason. Memory is social. Minds model other minds, and that model doesn't vanish in a day. Remembering keeps the model alive while the world updates, and it teaches what mattered. So old memories surface not to trap us in the past, but to help the present make sense of the empty space. Why do people worry about unfinished business? Because our minds run on plans and promises, and death sets a hard end. An unfinished task feels like an open tab, always tugging. The brain predicts what should happen next, and it hates a broken pattern. So the worry isn't random. It's a signal saying, take the next step while there's time. We're social animals, and our lives are woven from shared threads. Debts repaid, thanks said, knowledge passed on. In small groups, leaving things hanging could harm trust, so we evolved to care about closure. When time feels short, those loose threads shout, and faces rise in the mind before objects or goals. There's another layer, which is meaning. We don't just count tasks, we tell a story about who we were. Unfinished business threatens that arc, because a broken promise can colour the whole plot. So we try to set it straight, to apologise, to forgive, to pass things on, to say what mattered. We also can't finish everything, and that's not a failure. The world is messy, and life keeps making new threads as it ends old ones. So the task isn't to complete the list, it's to choose. Worry points to what we owe and love. We close what we can, and we let the rest be human. Why do people imagine their own death differently? We picture the future by stitching pieces of the past and the stories around us. Death is the hardest picture because it's the one thing we can't test or rehearse. So the mind guesses. It fills the blank with what feels known, and that differs from person to person. Some of us have seen hospitals and tubes and slow goodbyes, so that's the shape we expect. Others have met sudden loss, so they imagine a sharp break. Culture writes scripts too. If belief says there's a journey, the scene opens. If it says nothing follows, the frame closes. Personality adds color. If we like control, we picture plans and farewells. If we live with anxiety, we picture surprise. The body speaks as well. Pain, age, and illness narrow the horizon, and hope widens it. And there's a puzzle we all share. We can't imagine not being. So we aim at the last moments, not the absence after, and we fill them with meaning we already carry. That picture can comfort or push us to change how we live. People imagine death differently because each life tunes the mind differently, and the mind paints what it knows. Why do cultural symbols of death vary so much? Death is the same event everywhere, and yet the signs we choose aren't. A symbol is a small shared story, and stories grow from what people see and need. Place matters. Deserts dry the body, so wind and dust stand in. Jungles rot and bloom, so flowers and bones meet. Animals teach too, so crows, jackals, or vultures carry the message. Tools and customs shape the image. If people burn their dead, flame and smoke suggest release. If they bury, earth and stone feel right. Colours follow what's at hand and what feels true. Black gathers light and feels weighty, while white shrouds mean absence, so different worlds choose different coats for mourning. History leans in. Rulers build tombs to make death speak of order, and that turns pyramids, stone pillars and flags into markers. Faiths answer fear with meaning, so symbols point to gates, rivers, or cycles. Trade and conquest braid traditions. In Mexico, marigolds and saints meet, and the path back home glows orange. So they vary because each culture solves the same problem with local tools. A symbol has to carry grief into the open and offer a way to remember and maybe to hope. As places change, the signs shift, but the work remains. They name an ending, and they keep love present. Why do people create rituals around death? Because death breaks the pattern, and ritual puts a pattern back. It takes a day that feels formless and gives it a shape with steps and words. Humans mark thresholds because the mind needs a doorway, not a cliff. And shared acts turn private shock into something a community can carry. It also solves real tasks because the living must act. The body is cared for, neighbours gather, meals appear, and time is cleared. But beneath that, the ritual sets a boundary. The person becomes story and name, not presence. And that shift is easier when many voices speak it at once. There's a deeper thing too. When nothing can be fixed, doing something helps. Repeated gestures steady attention, and a small sense of control returns. Symbols pack meaning into touch and sight, so a candle or stone can hold years. Saying the name again lays fresh tracks in memory, and love keeps moving. Across cultures, rituals also place the dead somewhere in the map of meaning, and place the living somewhere too. They say, this is where we stand now, and this is how we go on. In that shared pattern, grief doesn't fade, but it finds direction. And that's why people keep them. Why do we fear losing identity at death? We grow up learning our name, our face in the mirror, the feeling of being the same person from one day to the next. The brain builds a model called me, and it uses it to steer our lives. When we imagine death, that model finds no next step, and alarms go off. Identity is a story stitched from memory, habits, and hopes. It runs on continuity, because prediction needs a stable narrator. Death looks like a cut in the film, not a scene change. We can picture pain or joy, but we can't picture the absence of experience, so the mind treats it as a threat. There's also the web around us. Part of who we are lives in other people's heads. We fear leaving those we love, and we fear becoming a name without a voice. So cultures promise paths that carry the thread, and we make legacies, because meaning wants somewhere to live. Underneath, the fear isn't foolish. It's a signal of what we prize: awareness, choice, and connection. The self is a process, not an object, always changing, yet held together by memory. Death is the end of that process for us. We fear it because life is built to continue. Why do some people feel connected to ancestors? Because we don't arrive out of nowhere. We're born into a story already moving, with names and faces that shape the world we enter. So the mind reaches back. It looks for roots that make sense of who we are. And when someone dies, that tug grows stronger, because endings sharpen the need for a thread. Part of it is memory and learning. Our brains tie feelings to faces, places, and objects. So a ring or a recipe or a song can light up networks built by love. Rituals do the same job. They keep attention on the link, and repetition strengthens it, so connection becomes a habit of mind. There's also the body. We carry their DNA, the instructions for building us, copied through an unbroken chain of lives. That's not memory, but it is inheritance. Traits, risks, even a few chemical marks from hardships can echo across generations. So the feeling of a line isn't just an idea, it's written into us. And then there's time itself. We live one moment, but we come from many. The atoms in our blood were made in stars, and our customs were shaped by people who tried, failed, and learned. Feeling connected to ancestors says our life sits in a long arc, and the arc keeps going after us. Why do we wonder if dying hurts? We ask because pain is our oldest signal. It tells a living thing to move, to fight, to survive. Dying sits at the edge of that system, and the brain hates edges. So it takes the unknown and turns it into a simpler test. Will it hurt, or will it pass without pain? Dying isn't one event. It's many paths. Some involve injury and clear pain. Others are slow failures of heart or lungs. Medicine can blunt pain, and the body itself releases chemicals that soften it. As oxygen falls, awareness can fade, so the experience varies, which keeps the question alive. We also wonder because we love. We picture the people we've lost, and we want to know what they felt. Stories fill the gaps, and some are terrifying, but many are ordinary. Pain is something we understand, so we reach for it when we face what we can't imagine, which is absence. So does dying hurt? Sometimes yes, and often less than we fear, and often eased by care. The deeper thing is the asking. It's our way to look over the edge and still keep living. We test the dark with a simple question, and that makes the dark a little smaller. Why do people question if dying feels fast or slow? I think people ask this because time doesn't feel steady. A minute in a waiting room can drag, and a year can vanish. In a fall or a crash, people say the world slows down. So at the edge of life, the question rises, does time stretch or does it drop away? Time, as we feel it, is built inside the brain. It stitches moments into a line, and it speeds or slows with what matters to us. Under danger, the body floods with stress signals, memory turns vivid, and seconds feel wide. Under anesthesia, memory stops writing, and hours pass like nothing happened. Near-death reports often speak of a rush of images, a life review, and a strange stillness. There's a simple idea here. As oxygen falls, the brain can fire in waves, and the last sparks may pack experience into a short span. That density can make a few moments feel like an open, lingering space. So we ask because we're really asking what our last experience will be. We want to prepare and to care for those we love. We want to know if being held or having pain eased can tilt it. The honest answer is that dying can feel both, because the brain is the clock. And that thought, somehow, makes time feel precious. Why do some people fear dying in their sleep? It's a fear of two things at once: the unknown and losing control. Night makes both feel close, because our senses switch down and the world goes still. Our ancestors were most at risk in the dark, so the brain still treats darkness as danger, even in locked houses. And there's agency. When we're awake, we can act, call for help, hold a hand. In sleep, we can't. So the mind imagines being taken without a chance to choose. It also imagines missing the last words. That picture feels wrong, because we want endings to be shared and witnessed. Stories amplify it. Rare events get repeated, so they feel common. A headline about a young person lost at night sticks, while the millions who wake up fine leave no trace. Most nighttime deaths come from heart rhythm problems, strokes, or breathing disorders, and risk rises with age and illness. So, the fear isn't foolish. It's the brain trying to protect a life that likes to steer. Knowledge helps, because for healthy people, the risk is very low, and care helps, because treatable conditions can be found and managed. And it reminds us to live now, and say the words while we can. Why do others fear dying awake? Fear of dying awake isn't only about death itself, it's about awareness. The brain is built to detect danger and to act, and at the end, there's nothing left to do. Pain might rise, breath might fail, and control slips. The thought of watching the end arrive, unable to steer, unsettles us. We also live by stories, and endings matter. People want time to choose, to thank, to forgive, to say things. Being awake can feel like a mirror held to the last page with no edits. Imagination fills the gap, and it favors worse cases. In crisis, seconds stretch, so one moment can feel wide. There's another layer. To be conscious is to witness finality, and finality is stark. Many deaths are eased by care, with pain reduced and breath made easier. But the mind still asks what it's like to know it's the end. That question is heavy because it's private, and no one returns to explain it. So, the fear gathers around pain and control and the bright edge of knowing. Yet awareness can also hold a last choice: to notice faces, to accept help, to let gratitude pass through. Some find that, others don't. To die awake is to meet the border of life as it is, and that's hard. Why does loss make life feel urgent? Maybe because loss draws a hard line through time. There's a before and then an after, and the after has edges we can see. We know in theory that time runs out, but loss moves it from idea to fact. Our clocks keep ticking, and our sense of waiting just stops. Under the hood, the brain is always predicting the next moment, and loss breaks the model. It triggers alarm, but it also sharpens value. When something becomes scarce, it matters more, so minutes feel rare. So we bring plans forward and we speak sooner, because delay now carries a cost. We see it after a funeral, when we phone someone we love, or finally book the visit we kept moving. The horizon seems nearer, so small arguments lose weight. The cosmos has the same truth in it. Stars burn their fuel, and that finiteness gives each shining hour a strange significance. Urgency isn't panic, it's focus. Loss strips away the fiction of endless chances, so choices stand out. We say yes to the vital things and no to the noise. Limited time gives meaning weight, and that pressure is the shape of love. That's why the heart races toward what matters. Why do people believe in signs after death? When someone dies, the world tilts and ordinary things feel charged. The mind searches for a pattern that holds the break. A light flickers, a bird lands on the window, a favorite song appears right then, and it feels like a thread between here and whatever's gone. Brains are built to spot patterns and causes, because that kept our ancestors alive. Pure chance is hard to carry, so we lean towards seeing a someone behind events. And the bond doesn't switch off. The systems that expect their voice still fire, so a sudden song or a stray knock lands in that open space. It also helps with pain. A sign lets love continue as action, a way to talk, to decide, to keep a promise. Cultures build rituals around that need, and it steadies us. And memory favors the hits. We keep the day the robin arrived, and we forget the long gaps when nothing happened. Are those events messages? That's a different claim. But meaning is real because minds make it and then live by it. Even if a coincidence is only physics, the choice it sparks is part of the story. The dead still shape our days through us, and the sign becomes how love keeps moving. Why does grief affect decisions? Because grief is a full-body change, not just a feeling. The brain builds a map of life around the people we love, and loss tears holes in that map. The systems that weigh options shift, so the rules we use for choosing don't feel stable anymore. Biology helps explain this. The body is stressed. Stress chemicals flood the system, and the brain's alarm network gets louder while planning networks tire. Attention narrows to danger and pain, so the mind favors whatever eases the hurt now. That can mean rushing a choice or freezing, because both ease the strain for a moment. Grief also rewrites the future we were aiming at. If the picture of tomorrow collapses, the yardsticks we use to measure choices vanish. Some swing toward risk, trying to fill the gap, and others toward caution, guarding what remains. Meaning matters, and when it shakes, every path feels uncertain. There's a social piece too. The brain expects signals from a shared life, and when those stop, it overcorrects. With time and company, the map rebuilds. Alarms quiet, and options broaden again. Grief affects decisions because love shapes the brain, and loss bends those same circuits. Why does grief feel like fear sometimes? It can feel like standing on a cliff edge, even when nothing is chasing us. That's because the body doesn't wait for reasons. It listens for change. When someone we love is gone, the oldest parts of the brain hear danger. Something vital has vanished, so the threat circuits fire and grief takes the shape of fear. Those systems kept our ancestors alive, so they react fast. The brain's alarm bell, the amygdala, flags loss like a predator nearby. Heart rate rises and the gut tightens, ready to act. As children, we panic when a caregiver disappears. As adults, the same wiring treats separation and death as a survival risk. There's also uncertainty. Fear is, at heart, not knowing what happens next. Grief steals our map of tomorrow, so the mind scans and predicts and can't find stable ground. We're poised to run or fight, but there's nowhere to go. The body holds that energy, and it feels like dread. And underneath it all is love. We fear losing what matters because it shaped our world and gave it meaning. When it's torn away, the alarm sounds to say the stakes were real. So grief borrows fear's body until the mind rebuilds its map and the heart learns the new shape of life. Why do we imagine death differently depending on age? We picture death through the time we think we have because the horizon moves as we age. A child hasn't yet glued together permanence and cause, so endings can feel like pauses. A teenager's brain chases novelty and underweights risk, so death sits far away, almost abstract, more idea than fact. As brains mature, we get better at imagining long chains of cause and effect, and at holding two thoughts at once. The future still feels vast when we're young, so losses seem temporary, replaceable. With age, time feels shorter, so we weigh trade-offs differently, and finality starts to mean something immediate. Experience shifts the picture too. We collect funerals and births, and both press the idea of endings into focus. Our bodies change, and small frailties speak. Memory grows longer behind us than ahead, so priorities bend toward meaning. What once felt hypothetical becomes personal, and that makes the unknown feel closer. Culture sets frames around all this. Beliefs about afterlives, legacy, and duty give shapes to fear and hope, and those shapes fit differently at different ages. So we imagine death in ways that help us live the part of life we're in. The event is the same, but the viewpoint moves. Why do people worry about dying the wrong way? Because death isn't only an ending, it's a way of ending. We spend years building a life, and the last scene feels like it should fit the story. So people imagine pain, confusion, or being alone, and it clashes with that hope. It's a fear of losing control when control matters most. Underneath that is an older logic. Bodies are tuned to avoid harm, so the mind pays more attention to threats than to easy endings, and that once kept us safe. Culture adds its own script. Stories praise a pain-free passing and warn of chaos, and modern medicine can save lives, but it can also stretch dying in ways that feel strange. People also want to stay themselves to the end. They worry about pain, confusion, or losing dignity, and about being a burden on those they love. The way someone dies becomes part of how they're remembered. So the fear is partly about the story others will hold when the last page turns. But there's another way to read it. That worry points to values. It says we care about choice, comfort, and meaning. So we make plans, we talk, and we choose care that matches what matters. Death will come in many forms, but the way we meet it can still feel true to a life. Why do some claim to see lights or figures near death? Stories of a bright tunnel or familiar figures appear again and again, and across cultures. It isn't a simple proof of one idea, but it does show how a human brain behaves when it's pushed to the limit. The body falters, and the brain fights to keep a picture of the world. When blood and oxygen drop, vision narrows, so a tunnel appears, and a bright center blooms. The retina and visual cortex misfire, and patterns sharpen and pulse. Stress chemicals surge, and networks that build faces and voices keep working. The temporal lobe can spark a strong sense of presence, as if someone's near. At the same time, the brain looks for meaning, because it always does. It reaches into memory and culture, and it fills the sketch with parents, friends, or figures it was taught to trust. The sense of time can stretch, and the self can loosen, so light and warmth feel vast and close. Some hear comfort in that, and some hear mystery, and both responses make sense. The biology gives a map of how such scenes can form, but the meaning people carry away is theirs. So the lights and figures may be the brain's last great model, or a threshold. Either way, it feels like the edge. Why do memories of the dead change over time? Memory isn't a recording we can play back. It's rebuilt each time we remember, and it's saved again in the shape of that moment. So when someone dies, the memory stops getting new scenes from them, but it keeps taking edits from us, because our lives keep moving. Feelings in the moment set the color and the frame. Details fade first, because the brain is busy. It keeps what helps us act, and it lets go of what we don't use. Grief pulls some moments close and pushes others out, so the sharp edges soften. Photos, stories, and anniversaries become guides, and we start shaping them to match who we're becoming. Memories also travel through groups. Families retell certain scenes, and repetition cuts a deeper path while the rest grows faint. A place or a smell can bring back a fragment, and it joins the picture we already have. And when we learn something new, the whole story shifts to fit. We think memory serves the past, but it serves the future. It helps us choose, and it keeps a bond by turning a person into lessons, habits, and hopes. So their memory changes because we change. It's how we carry them forward, not as a fixed picture, but as a living influence. Why do some fears disappear after losing someone? When someone dies, the world is rearranged. The scale shifts. Fear is a forecast system predicting harm or loss. After loss, the worst has happened, so the baseline is different. The small alarms lose volume. The mind simplifies priorities because love and time feel scarce. This resets what we care about. The brain's alarm, the amygdala, learns by contrast, and big shocks reset its dials. When grief arrives, the system updates. Some social fears, embarrassment, failure, stop feeling like real danger because compared to death, they don't touch what's precious. Early stress chemistry can blunt reactions, which looks like bravery, but it's narrowing. Loss also clarifies meaning. If life is finite, then waiting makes less sense, and action feels kinder than avoidance. People book the trip, say the hard words, forgive old debts, because the risk of not doing it grows larger than the risk of stumbling. Courage is attention held on what matters. Not every fear fades. Some sharpen, like fearing more loss, because love makes new edges. But others fall away because the mind has stood at the edge and redrawn its map. The world isn't safer. The heart is simply clearer about which dangers to obey and which to leave behind. Why do some fears appear only after losing someone? Because loss changes what the world means. Before, our days were stable, and the brain quietly learned that certain places and sounds were safe. Then the person is gone, and the same cues point to pain. The empty chair, the late-night phone, the hospital smell. Safety flips to warning. Our brain is a prediction machine, and grief is a massive prediction error. The amygdala, which tags things as threat or not, updates fast. The hippocampus, which binds memories to places and times, relinks those cues with loss. So, alarms spread, and fear pops up in corners that were still. Something else happens. Loss makes death feel real, not abstract, and that changes our risk map. We notice how fragile routines are, and how little control we had. So new fears arrive about our own body, the future, the next call at night, because uncertainty has moved into the house. Over time, the brain learns again. New experiences pair those cues with life, and the alarms settle, though they don't vanish. Fear isn't a failure of love. It's part of how love protects what it values. Some fears appear after loss because love rewires our sense of risk, and loss rewires it again. Why does death change relationships? Relationships aren't things on a shelf. They're living patterns of exchange and expectation over time. We tune to another person, and our brains quietly predict the next call, the next look, the next shared task. Death breaks that loop. There are no new signals, so the pattern collapses, and we feel the gap. Because the future is gone, the past changes. We remake memories without fresh corrections, and meanings shift. Small moments gain weight, and arguments take on a different light. Regret and gratitude rearrange the story, and the story freezes at a final frame, so we ask what it meant, and that question reshapes love. There's also the matter of roles. Families and friendships are systems, and one person held a function. When they die, responsibilities, traditions, jokes, even conflicts all move. The space they held changes how the rest connect. Some ties tighten, some loosen. So, relationships among the living shift too, because the network has rewired. And there's a strange continuity. The bond doesn't vanish, it moves inward. We speak to them in thought, and we act in ways they taught us. It becomes one-sided, but it's still alive in behavior and choice. Death ends interaction, not influence. It changes the shape of love, and we carry it forward. Why do some feel older after a loss? Loss draws a line in our lives. There's a before and an after, and the air feels heavier because time suddenly matters. It's not abstract anymore. A person who carried part of our days is gone, and the shape of the future changes. So we feel older, standing in that new shape. Grief also moves through the body. Stress rises, and the heart works harder, and food tastes different, because the whole system is reacting to threat and change. That makes joints ache and thoughts slow, like a sudden winter. The body reads it as wear, so it signals back, we're older. And loss changes how the mind holds time. Days stretch, but months slip, because attention grips what hurts and lets the rest blur. When a parent or partner dies, roles shift. We become the one who decides, or remembers, or holds the family story, and responsibility itself adds years. There's another piece. Once we've watched a life end, our own time stops feeling endless, and meaning gets sharper. We count seasons, and we choose more carefully because we know they run out. Feeling older is that knowledge settling in the bones. It's the weight of love carried forward. Why is silence uncomfortable after someone dies? Something changes in the room when the talking stops. And it isn't just sound that's gone. Our brains are pattern makers, always guessing the next footstep and the next reply. When a voice that shaped our days doesn't answer, the guess fails, and that failure feels like a sudden drop. So the silence points at the shape of the person. And we're social creatures, built to steady each other with chatter and small gestures. Talk keeps emotions in rhythm, like walking with someone. When it's quiet, feelings swing wider, and we worry we'll say the wrong thing, so we say nothing. And that makes it heavier. The empty chair starts to feel like a statement. Silence also leaves room for questions we avoid. What does it mean that a story can stop? What does that say about mine? In noise, we can delay those thoughts, but in quiet they arrive, and they're large. The discomfort is the mind meeting finality, and discovering love has nowhere immediate to go. With time, the silence can shift. We start to hear traces in it, not magic, just memory and habit stitched into us. We tell stories, and the room gains structure again. Words don't fix the absence, but they carry it well. It hurts because a life mattered, and because ours still does. Why do some deaths inspire life changes? Because death puts a bright edge on time. Most days, we act as if time stretches on and small things fill it. Then someone we love is gone, and the distance between now and the end collapses. The ordinary rules feel flimsy, and choices that once waited suddenly feel urgent. Grief also breaks routines. Habits run on cues and rewards, and loss scrambles the cues. In that open space, the mind checks its map. Strong emotion stamps memories as important, and we start sorting. This matters, that doesn't. We notice neglected hopes, and we feel permission to choose differently. It changes our place in the web of people. A parent dies, and someone becomes the elder. A friend dies young, and risk feels real. New duties appear, or old pressures lift. So we stop drinking, or we call estranged family, or we leave a job that steals our hours. Not every death does this. Sometimes we're numb, or the change fades. But the ones that reshape us are close, sudden, or rich with meaning, and they give us a story to live by. The clock feels loud, the compass steadies, and we move because life is brief and ours. Why do people compare different kinds of loss? We learn the world by noticing differences, and the mind leans on contrast. So when something breaks in a life, we reach for a scale. Is this like losing a job, or like losing a parent? We're trying to find shape, because pain without shape feels endless. Comparison is a basic tool for prediction. If it's like that other loss, then this may last months, and these rituals may help, and these people might understand. In groups, we also compare because care is finite. Hospitals triage, communities plan funerals and leave. Ranking isn't cold by design. It's a way to share limited time and attention. But there's a cost when we turn pain into a league table. Grief has shape, but it's not the same shape for everyone. Comparing can give comfort, and it can also shrink a voice. People end up saying others had it worse, so theirs doesn't count. That hides what's real, and it slows healing. So the skill is to compare for orientation, not for verdicts. Use it to spot patterns that guide care and to notice the shared core of loss. Something loved is gone, and a world has to be rebuilt. Death makes the point plain. We compare to understand, and we heal when we also accept. Why does grief affect sleep? When someone we love dies, the world tilts. The brain is built to guard what matters, so loss rings an alarm. That alarm doesn't switch off at night, and it keeps the mind scanning for danger and change. Grief is love under threat, and the body treats threat as something to stay awake for. So, stress chemistry floods the system. Cortisol and adrenaline rise, heart rate runs a touch high, and the brain stays on a hair trigger. Deep rest is lighter and breaks often. The body clock also needs regular cues, and grief shakes them. Meals shift, light exposure changes, and social patterns fall apart. At night, the mind turns to unfinished work. Thoughts loop, and memories arrive uninvited. In dreaming, the brain tries to file emotional memories, so it replays faces and moments to soften their sting. That job is useful, but it's loud. Dreams feel vivid, the heart races, and waking comes before the work is done. With time and support, the alarm eases because the world grows predictable again. Routines return, and the body learns it's safe to stand down. The loss remains, but it sits inside a larger story. And then rest becomes a workshop again, not a watchtower, because love has found its place. Why does grief affect appetite? Grief isn't just a feeling in the mind, it's a full body alarm. The brain detects danger in loss, and it flips the stress switches. Adrenaline rises, cortisol follows, and the body moves into survival mode. Digestion is pushed aside, the stomach tightens, and food, which is normally welcome, suddenly feels out of place. In the first days that makes hunger fade. The nerves that link brain and gut slow the gut's waves, so food lingers and nausea comes. Smell and taste can dull, so nothing seems worth chewing. Even thirst can dip. The body is saying, save energy for watching and for holding yourself together. But grief doesn't sit still, and the body doesn't either. If stress stays high, cortisol keeps whispering, eat quick fuel. Signals that say hungry and full, like ghrelin and leptin, drift. Some people lose interest, others crave sugar and fat, because fast calories and familiar tastes promise steadiness when everything else is moving. And there's the social piece. Meals are tiny anchors in a day, and loss cuts the lines, so timing and company vanish. Body signals also change with inflammation, which can blunt hunger. So appetite bends because grief tells a body, survive first, adjust later. When the world steadies again, appetite usually finds its way back. Why do people feel responsible for things they couldn't control? The mind hates blank space in a story, so when something terrible happens, we hunt for causes. And when the cause is messy or out of reach, we turn inwards. We ask what we missed or failed to do. Around death, that urge sharpens, because finality offers no second chance to test the story. Our brains evolved to predict, and they do it by running if-then plays. That's counterfactual thinking. If I'd left earlier, if I'd called, if I'd noticed. It's a learning engine, and it keeps us safe next time. But it can mistake rehearsal for responsibility, and practice can feel like blame. There's also a social reason. Responsibility is a signal of care, and groups survive when someone steps up. So even when events were beyond anyone's reach, taking weight can feel like loyalty. It also protects a belief we depend on, that choices matter. Pure chance is harder to live with than guilt. So the feeling arrives honestly, but feelings aren't proof of control. What helps is to keep the lesson and drop the verdict. Notice what the mind is trying to save, and let meaning come from care in the present, because that honors what was lost without rewriting a past that no one could change. Why do some people appear calm during loss? Sometimes what looks like calm is the body in shock. The brain switches to an emergency mode that keeps the face still so we can act. It's the freeze part of fight or flight. Stress chemicals narrow attention, hold tears back for a while, and make decisions feel automatic. And sometimes it's a role. A person becomes the organizer because someone has to call, sign, and steady the room. The mind builds a checklist, and that structure holds feelings in a box for later. Rituals do this too. Steps give shape to chaos, and shape can feel like safety. There's also experience and belief. People who've faced danger or cared for the dying have practiced this state, so their bodies find it again. And if someone sees death as part of a larger story, whether spiritual or not, that frame can soften the shock and make acceptance possible. But steadiness doesn't mean a lack of feeling. It's often a pause before the wave. When the tasks end, the body opens the box and the grief comes back through. Appearances don't measure love. This composed look is just one way a mind carries what's too heavy, long enough to put it down. Why do some people break down years later? Because the mind is built to keep us going in the moment, and sometimes it shelves pain for later. In a crisis, we do what's needed, and we steer around the deepest parts because we have jobs and children and bills. So the loss sits there, not gone, just held in storage, waiting. It can wait a very long time. When life slows, the brain has room to look. And memory isn't a fixed picture, it's a living web of sights and smells and places. When a web strand gets tugged, the whole thing wakes. A song, a doorway, the same hospital light, and the old feeling returns to be felt. Not because we failed before, but because remembering opens the box. There's also the way the body stores stress through habits. We hold our breath, we tense a jaw, we rush. That pattern can carry us for years. Then a small change, a child leaves home, work ends, we move, and safety returns, and the body lets go, and the tears begin. Grief isn't a straight line. It's a long orbit around a missing star. It comes back when gravity lines up. Breaking down years later isn't weakness. It's the system finally doing the work it postponed. It's love finding a new shape, and it takes the time it takes. Why do people question their beliefs after death? When a life ends, the person can't ask anything. So the question really sits with the living, and with those who came close and returned. Death drags belief into bright light, because a neat idea meets a hard fact. The mind wants a story that fits the world, so it tests its own story. Brains build small models of how things work, and they keep them by checking what happens next. When something huge doesn't fit, the model strains and it changes. Death is the biggest misfit, because it ends plans and patterns at once. So grief is feeling and thinking work. We search for a shape that holds. Beliefs also live in groups. We inherit words and rituals, but each loss is personal, so the fit gets tested in a new way. A kind friend dies young, and a cruel man lives long. That clash pushes a choice. hold tighter, or loosen and reshape, so pain makes sense and love has a place. Some who brush the edge report visions and peace, and that can shift belief overnight. But the brain under stress can weave scenes that feel solid. Either way, the questioning isn't failure. It's care for truth and care for the dead. We ask because death is a border, and borders show what matters. Why do we keep searching for answers about death? Because death is the one fact that frames every life, and the one experience none of us can report on. Minds are built to predict, and uncertainty scrambles plans. So we ask. We test stories, we build rituals, we study bodies and brains, and we listen to grief and wonder. Curiosity kept ancestors alive because the unknown could be food or danger. That habit never switched off. Death is the deepest unknown, so the mind tries to map it. Science explains how bodies fail and what awareness seems to need, but it can't show what it's like not to be. And love pulls the questions closer. When someone is gone, the bond doesn't vanish, it changes, and minds reach for where it went. We search because we want lives to add up to more than dates. We want fairness, and we want guidance for how to live with loss and hope. So the search becomes a mirror. It tells what we value and what we fear, and it shapes laws, care, and kindness. Maybe we're not trying to defeat death so much as to place it. When the horizon is known to exist, even if far, it helps set a course.